The next chapter is here. Chapter number 3. After completion of chapter number 1, we should proceed with chapter number 3, concept of supply. We should proceed with chapter number 3, concept of supply, because one need to know what is meant by the word supply. That means what is the taxable event with respect to GST, and all these things we should learn here. So after completion of chapter number 3, we will see chapter number 2. So now I will explain you overall concept in some 5 to 10 minutes. Every act has its own taxable event. Prati act ki kuda there will be a taxable event. Sir, what is meant by the word taxable event? When tax is levied, when tax is imposed, what is the triggering point of taxation? What is the triggering point of taxation? That will be dealt with. This concept is known as taxable event. Whereas with respect to supply also, with respect to GST also, there is a taxable event. So the taxable event with respect to GST is supply. The taxable event with respect to GST is supply. Okay. Now the next question arises. Okay, sir, what is meant by the word supply? What is supply? And is there any conditions or to be satisfied for treating it as supply? So the taxable event with respect to GST is supply. Okay. Now supply means, sir, what is meant by the word supply? Are there any conditions that are to be satisfied to treat them as supply? Yes, there are some conditions that are to be satisfied. Yes, there are conditions to be satisfied. Okay. Sir, okay, conditions are satisfied, then it is a supply. That is okay. Then sometimes conditions may or may not be satisfied. Na? Even though the conditions are satisfied, is there any possibility to treat it as a supply? Yes, in some cases. Next point is here. Even though the conditions are not satisfied, then also is it a supply? Yes, in some cases it is a supply. Yes, in some cases it is a supply. Okay. Sir, okay. If at all some conditions are satisfied, then it is a supply. Even though sometimes the conditions are not satisfied, then also it is a supply. That is also okay. After knowing that it is a supply, we should classify it as a supply of goods or supply of service, or it is not necessary. Already told you in first chapter itself that yes, classification is necessary to treat it in order to avoid further disputes. In order to apply the tax rates, definitely classification is needed. Understood? So, whereas with respect to that, classification, whether it is a good or service, okay, we should classify it. But sometimes, just like this, even though the conditions are not satisfied, it is a supply. Yes, some cases, in the same way, even conditions are satisfied, still cannot be treated as supply. That means generally conditions satisfy chese supply annaru kada. Even though conditions ni satisfy chesina, even though the conditions are satisfied, still is there any possibility to treat that as not a supply? Yes, in some cases. Yes, in some cases. Yes, in some cases. Sir, supply means definitely what we can say is it to be supplied individually or as a bundle? Is it to be supplied individually or as a bundle? It can be done in any of the way. That means supply can be done right here, okay. Supply can be made, that means individually or as a bundle. Can be both. Can be both. So here what we can say is, so the taxable event with respect to GST is supply. Sir, మరి సప్లై అవ్వాలంటే ఏమన్నా కండిషన్స్ని సాటిస్ఫై చేయాలా? ఎస్, కొన్ని కండిషన్స్ని కనుక సాటిస్ఫై చేస్తే డెఫినెట్లీ ఇట్ ఈజ్ ఏ సప్లై. సార్, కండిషన్స్ని సాటిస్ఫై చేయకపోయినా సప్లై అవ్వడానికి పాసిబిలిటీ ఉందా? ఎస్, ఇన్ సర్టన్ కేసెస్. మనం కండిషన్స్ని సాటిస్ఫై చేసిన సప్లై అవ్వకపోవడానికి పాసిబిలిటీ ఉందా? ఎస్, ఇన్ సర్టన్ కేసెస్. ఆఫ్టర్ determining it is a supply of the goods or supply of service, classification is necessary. Yes. Sir, supply as an individual item manam cheyala or as a bundle manam cheyala? Yes, both can be done. Here this is the overview of this particular chapter. So, sir, supply avvali ante, is it necessary to have some conditions? Yes, those conditions are there in 7 subsection 1 clause A. And whereas even though the conditions are not satisfied, still it is a supply and yes, in some cases annam kadamma, దీన్నే మనం ఏమంటామంటే deemed supply. This will be taken care by 7.1c. That means 7.1c deals with the topics like deemed supply. Even though the conditions are not satisfied, still it is regarded as supply. And inko point చెప్పాను, sir, conditions ni satisfy చేసిన still supply కిందకి రాని కేసెస్ ఉన్నాయా? Yes, 7 subsection 2 deals with that particular matter. Sir, after determining it is a supply of goods or supply of service, classification undi annaru kada. Yes, 7 subsection 1a deals with classification. 7 subsection 1a deals with classification. And whereas another point is there, 7.1b, it deals with importation. That means not only within India, outside India also. That means within India మాత్రమే కాదు, outside India మనం చేసిన అది కూడా, the transaction, international transactions are also covered under the word supply. It will be taken care by 7.1b. And sir, items ని individual గా supply చేయాలా, as a bundle supply చేయాలా? Can be both. It will be decided by section 8, composite and mixed supply. It is the total overview of the chapter what we are going to discuss now. So, what are the conditions that are to be satisfied to treat a transaction as a supply will be dealt by 7 subsection 1 clause A. Not only domestic transactions, international transactions are also covered under GST. It is the point that is there in 7.1b. And even though the conditions are not satisfied, still it is a supply. This matter will be taken care by 7.1c. And whereas, even though the conditions are satisfied, still it is not regarded as supply, that point will be taken care by 7 subsection 2. And if at all it is a supply, whether it is a supply of the good or a supply of service, will be taken care by classification 7 subsection 1a. And if the item is supplied as a bundle, then whether it is a topic of composite or mixed supply will be decided by section 8. This is the overview of the topic supply, what we are going to discuss in the next session. That's it. Just now we completed the concept of the overview of supply, that is the taxable event with respect to GST. So in that, the overview what we discussed is, so what is meant by the word supply and what are the conditions that are needed to be satisfied for treating it as a supply? That means, sir, supply kindaki ravali, and is there any requirements that are to be satisfied to treat it as a supply? So definitely these things will be taken care by section 7 subsection 1 clause A. And sir, even international transactions are also covered under the word supply, or on international transactions are we liable to pay the GST? Yes, if at all some conditions are satisfied. It is specified in 7 subsection 1 clause B. And the third one is, so generally the conditions are there in 7.1a. The conditions are there in 7.1a. So for those conditions are satisfied, then definitely it is a supply. If the conditions are not satisfied, then definitely it is not a supply. But whereas in certain cases, even though the conditions which were there in 7.1a are not satisfied, definitely it is treated as supply. The concept is known as deemed supply. 7 subsection 1 clause C. Okay. And whereas the next point is, sir, after determining that it is a supply, we should, is it necessary to classify whether it is a supply of the good or a supply of service? Yes, it will be taken care by section 7 subsection 1a. And whereas even though the conditions that are there in 7.1a are satisfied, but still in some cases the transactions cannot be termed as supply. This thing will be taken care by 7 subsection 2 negative list of GST. And if at all the items are supplied as a bundle, or the items are supplied individually, then definitely items are supplied individually or as a bundle, then which sections will be applicable and how the tax rate will be determined, these things will be taken care by section 8. So this is the total story with respect to the overview of this chapter, what we are going to discuss now. So we will see those areas now. Okay, whether it is CGST, SGST or IGST, it is always levied on supply. Whether it is CGST or SGST or IGST, it is always levied on supply. Okay, fine. And the taxable event with respect to GST is supply. I already told you that what is meant by the word taxable event. So the taxable event means what we can say? Taxable event means when tax is levied or tax is imposed, when tax is levied, when tax is imposed, when tax is attracted. Okay. So the taxable event with respect to supply is, the taxable event with respect to GST is supply. And what is supply? So every supply of the goods or services are liable to tax, but which type of tax we need to pay, it depends upon nature of the supply. If at all it is the interstate supply, IGST will be levied. If at all it is the intrastate supply, CGST and SGST is levied. But one should know what is meant by the word supply. So here, this is the overview of the particular section, what we are going to discuss now. So in that, I already told you that. So in this particular case, so section 7 deals with this particular scope of supply. In that, there are 3 subsections, 7 subsection 1, 7 subsection 1e and 7 subsection 2. So 7 subsection 1 deals with 3 points, A, B, C. So that means clause A, clause B, clause C. Clause A deals with consideration. Clause B deals with importation of service. Clause C deals with deemed supplies. Okay. Clause A deals with general meaning of supply. That means 7 subsection 1 clause A deals with general meaning of supply. 7 subsection 1 clause B deals with importation of service. 7 subsection 1 clause C deals with deemed supplies, and 7 subsection 1A deals with 7 subsection 1A deals with classification, whether it is a good or a service, and 7 subsection 2 deals with negative list. That means exclusions from the word supply. This is an overview of this particular topic. We will see that now. We will come to this point later on. Now, initially we should start with 7 subsection 1A. That means in order to treat any transaction as a supply or any activity as a supply, what are the points that are to be satisfied and what is the general meaning of the word supply? All these things will be taken care by 7 subsection 1 clause A. So 7 subsection 1 clause A, supply includes, what does this mean? Definitions are divided into 2 types. Anybody in the class can tell me? Anybody in the class can tell me? Definitions can be divided into 2 types. What are those 2 types? Anybody in the class can tell me that? Anybody? No? Exhaustive definition, inclusive definition. Exhaustive definition, inclusive definition. So, exhaustive definition, inclusive definition, then definitely what happens is with respect to that, exhaustive definition or inclusive definition. So, what is meant by the word exhaustive definition? We cannot increase the scope of the definition. That means we can neither increase the scope nor decrease the scope of that particular definition. It is known as exhaustive definition. And what is meant by inclusive definition? What is meant by inclusive definition? So, inclusive definition means we can either increase the scope or decrease the scope. We can either increase the scope or decrease the scope. We can either increase the scope or decrease the scope. It is called inclusive definition. Generally, exhaustive definition will start with the word. Exhaustive definition will start with the word means. Inclusive definition will start with the word. Inclusive definition will start with the word. What we can say that? Includes. Say for example, honest person means in this class Mr. Rajesh. Honest person means Mr. Rajesh. So that means ప్రపంచంలో నిజాయితీ పరులు ఎవరైనా ఉన్నారా అంటే that is Mr. Rajesh only. We can neither increase the scope nor decrease the scope. That is called exhaustive one. Honest person means Mr. Rajesh, the one and only Rajesh. Whereas honest person includes Rajesh. That means there are so many people in the world that are honest. In those persons, Mr. Rajesh is one of the persons. That is called inclusive definition. So, exhaustive definition. What exhaustive definition will do? What the exhaustive definition? We can neither increase the scope nor decrease the scope. We can neither increase the scope nor decrease the scope. That is exhaustive definition. Second one, inclusive definition. Second one, inclusive definition. So now, inclusive definition, we can either increase the scope or decrease the scope. That is inclusive definition. Here, supply is the inclusive one. Supply is the inclusive one. Sir, what is meant by inclusive definition now? Say for example, inclusive supply includes all forms of supply such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rentals, lease, disposal. All these 8 forms are treated as supply. All these 8 forms are treated as supply. So, the list which is given in 7 subsection 1A is inclusive list. In future, the list may be either increased or the list may be decreased. Okay. The list may be either increased or the list may be either decreased. Understood? So, all forms of supply such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rentals, lease, disposal. These are the 8 forms. Sir, what is meant by the words of this meaning? So, what is meant by those things here? That means we will see sale. Sir, what is meant by the word sale? Generally, what is meant by the word sale? Anybody can tell me that? What is meant by the word sale? If the ownership is going to be transferred, it is known as sale. If the ownership is going to be transferred, it can be termed as sale. Okay. Sir, what about the word transfer here? What about the word transfer? Transfer includes, so now the point is here with respect to forms of supply. All forms of supply of services or goods or both are included in the definition of supply. The first word is sale. Sir, what is meant by the word sale? Generally, what we can say that with respect to sale? What we can say that with respect to sale? That means it is a transfer of ownership. Sale means the transfer of ownership in the goods from one person to another person for a consideration is known as sale generally. That means if at all the ownership is going to be transferred permanently, if at all the ownership is going to be transferred permanently, it is known as what we can say that? Sale. Transfer of ownership in the goods from one person to another person for a consideration is known as sale. Sir, what is meant by the word transfer? Generally, the word transfer has a wider meaning with respect to GST. The word transfer has a wider meaning with respect to GST. So, in that particular case, say for example, under the pre-GST regime, what happens is, the stock transfer, that means any transfer that happens between head office and branch or from one branch to another branch, it is only treated as stock transfer or branch transfer, and at that time there is no tax before implementation of GST. But whereas after implementation of GST, even though it is a stock transfer, even though it is a branch transfer, even though it is a branch transfer, even though it is a stock transfer, still we are liable to pay the GST if at all some conditions are satisfied. So, in order to cover those stock transfer, branch transfer into GST, the word transfer has been included in it. The word transfer has been included in it. You should remember that thing. Understood? And apart from that, what we can say, some hire purchase transactions. In hire purchase transactions also, ownership will not be transferred immediately. Ownership will be transferred in future. In order to cover those transactions are also under the word supply, the word transfer has been included in the definition of supply. And next one is barter exchange. So, transfer means, what is the conclusion? What is meant by the word transfer? Where the ownership may not be transferred, but the right in the goods is transferred, technically it is known as transfer. Where the ownership may be transferred, but where the ownership may not be transferred, but the right to goods is transferred, it is known as the word technically transfer. But logical ga transfer and word insert cheyadaniki major reason to cover stock transfers, branch transfers and hire purchase transactions. So, the next point comes to barter and exchange. So, what is meant by barter and exchange? Is there any difference between these two words, barter and exchange? Yes, definitely there is a difference between these two words. If at all the two parties exchange non-monetary consideration, then it is called barter. That means the consideration for both the parties, is itself non-monetary consideration, it is called barter. At least some part of the consideration is involved in terms of money, then it is called exchange. Understood? What is meant by the word here? So, barter means if two parties exchanges non-monetary consideration, it is called barter. That means the two parties will exchange non-monetary consideration only. Whereas with respect to exchange, at least some part of the consideration is involved. At least some part of the consideration is involved. In terms of money, it is called exchange. Say for example, mobile to mobile. I will give my mobile, please give me your mobile. This is called barter. Here two parties are exchanging non-monetary consideration. Here two parties are exchanging non-monetary consideration. Definitely it is a clear case of barter. Whereas I will give my mobile plus 40,000, please give me your mobile. In this case, at least some part of the consideration is in terms of money. Therefore, it is called exchange. So, if at all there is no money, so barter means in exchange of goods and services. In exchange of goods and services. For others also providing goods and services, it is called barter. It is called barter. Understood? What is meant by the word barter? If the exchange of goods and services for other goods and services, it is called barter. Sir, what about exchange? In that particular system, if at all any money is involved, it is called exchange. What about the word license? License is the word, that means what we can say is, license means giving right to use intangible assets. Giving right to use intangible assets. That means IPR, intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights. Understood? So, license means to use IPR, that means intellectual property rights like patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc. Okay, this is called license. This is called license. Understood? And whereas with respect to rentals, rental lease, technically there is a difference between these two words. The point is, but in layman language, మన language లో different circumstances లో దాన్ని మనవాడు యూజ్ చేస్తాడు కానీ, but technical గా difference ఉంది. Even ICA material లో, even this author material లో, they are used as synonyms, but there is a difference between lease and the rental. If at all there is a permission to use the movable property, it is called lease. If at all there is a permission to use the immovable property, it is called rentals. If at all it is a movable property, it is called as, lease. If at all it is a immovable property, it is known as rentals. Okay. So, permission to use an asset. If the asset is a movable one, it is called a lease. If the asset is a immovable one, it is known as, but in our layman language, many people will use the word like building taken on lease, land is taken on lease, but those words are wrong technically. Lease is a word that should be used for movable property only. Whereas rental is a word that should be used for immovable property only. Okay. And last but not the least, disposal. Generally, the word disposal is used for selling of old scrap or second-hand goods like that. Okay. So that means at the end of the lifetime, if the asset is sold, it is called disposal. So all these forms comes under the word supply. All these forms comes under the word supply. Okay, understood? We will see those points here. Generally, before going further, there are 6 parameters or 6 conditions that are to be satisfied to treat the transaction as supply as per 7 subsection 1 clause A. 7 subsection 1 clause A. So, as per 7 subsection 1 clause A, these are the 6 parameters that are to be satisfied. If these parameters are satisfied, definitely it is a supply. Definitely it is a supply. Understood? Definitely it is a supply. So with respect to this, so what are those 6 conditions that are to be satisfied to levy GST, or what are the conditions that are there in 7 subsection 1 clause A to levy the GST? These are the 6 conditions. First one, it should be a supply. Second one, the supply should be of goods and services. Third one, it should be done for a consideration. Fourth one, it should be done in the course or furtherance of business. And fifth one, it should be done by taxable person. And sixth one, it should be done by a taxable supply. Should be done by a taxable supply. Understood? So these are the 6 conditions or 6 parameters that are to be satisfied to treat the transaction as supply. First one, the activity should be a supply. That means should fall under the forms of supply. Second one, the supply should be of goods or services, and it should be done for a consideration, and it should be done in the course or furtherance of business, and should be a taxable person, and the supply should also be a taxable supply. If at all these points are satisfied, then definitely it is a supply. Definitely it is a supply as per 7(1)(a) technically, and GST is to be paid. So ఇక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రతి వర్డ్ ఇన్ డీటెయిల్ మనం ఇప్పుడు చూస్తున్నాం. ఫస్ట్ వర్డ్, వాట్ ఈస్ మెంట్ బై ద వర్డ్ సప్లై, ఇప్పుడు మనం మాట్లాడుకున్నది. సప్లై ఇంక్లూడ్స్ 8 forms. Supply includes 8 forms: sale, transfer, barter, exchange, lease, license, rentals, disposal. These are the 8 forms of supply. These are the 8 forms of supply that are there in 7 subsection 1 clause A. Say for example, Mr. Rajesh is a dealer of mobile worth 1 lakh rupees and also issues an invoice for that. Which form of supply it is? Mr. Rajesh is a dealer of mobiles, and that person sold 1 lakh worth mobiles and issues invoice for that also. Now what is the answer? Is it a supply? If at all yes, under which form it will be covered? Anybody? Yes, it is a supply. It is covered under the word sale, because the ownership is transferred. That's why the transaction is known as sale. Okay. Say for example, Mr. Raja sold a car to Mr. Shekhar for 70 lakhs. And in return, Mr. Shekhar gave his old car plus some 20 lakhs. In this particular case, whether the transaction is a supply. Yes, definitely it is a supply. It comes under exchange. At least some part of the consideration is involved in terms of money. And whereas the next one is, say for example, I just want to give you my mobile, and for that you just gave me your diamond ring which is there with you. In this particular case, 2 parties are exchanging non-monetary consideration. It comes under barter. Say for example, Mr. Raj is a developer of software, and he just gave the license to use his software for a subscription of some 10 lakhs to his client. In this particular case, whether this particular transaction is a supply. Yes, it is a supply. It is covered under the word license. Understood? The next one is here. So all these forms are actually covered under the word supplies. Generally these words are covered under supplies. So if at all it is a supply, so these are the forms of supplies. Already I told you them. So we will see form. Sale. Ownership is transferred for a consideration. It is called sale. If the ownership may not be transferred, but right in the goods may be transferred, it is transfer. Generally, it covers hire purchase, stock transfer, branch transfer, and whereas barter. Two parties exchanges goods or services without the involvement of money, that is called barter. Two parties exchange in-kind consideration but money is there, it is called exchange. And license gives right to use IPR, intellectual property rights, that are intangible assets like patents, copyrights, etc. And lease, right to use a movable asset is known as lease. Rentals, right to use immovable property is known as rentals. Disposal, selling the scrap or second-hand goods. Selling the scrap or second-hand goods is disposal. Okay, these are the forms of supply. And if the supply is of either goods or services or both, then it may be covered under 7(1)(a). So, there are 6 parameters that are to be satisfied to treat a transaction as a supply as per 7(1)(a). First one, the forms of supplies, the activity should fall in any of these forms of supply. And second one, the supply should be of either goods or services or both. Now the question is, sir, what is meant by the word goods? Now the question is, what is meant by the word goods? Before going that, say for example, furniture house is there. In that furniture house, furniture is sold. Furniture is sold. That means ownership is transferred to other party. Ownership is transferred to other party. Definitely it is a sale. And second one is hire purchase. That means here the ownership is not transferred immediately. Ownership is going to be transferred at a future date. That means after paying the last installment. Definitely it comes under transfer. And whereas this JCB is given on rent, definitely what it is? What it is? Lease. The parties are known as lessor and lessee. If at all this building is given on rent, then it is called rentals. If at all right to use movable property, it is called lease. Right to use immovable property, it is called rental. Okay. And here, so doctor provide medical consultancy service to this person, and in return barber actually provided a beautiful haircut to the doctor. So in this particular case, two parties exchanged non-monetary consideration. Two parties exchanged non-monetary consideration. So it comes under barter. Barter is also a form of supply. And whereas this bike plus 10 lakhs is in exchange for this car. In this particular case, two parties are exchanging non-monetary consideration, but at least some part of the consideration is in terms of money. Therefore, it comes under exchange. Understood? So the next point is, after completion of the word supply, supply should be of goods or services or both. Now the question arises, what is meant by the word goods and what is meant by the word service? We will see that. Goods means every kind of movable property. Goods means every kind of movable property. Sir, what is meant by the word movable property here? What is meant by the word movable property? Any person can tell me what is meant by the word movable property? Anybody? The word movable property has not been defined under GST. The word movable property has not been defined under GST. If at all a particular word is not defined under what we can say, a particular act, what we can say is, we should go by the definition, that is given under, General Clauses Act. We should go by the definition that is given under General Clauses Act. Sir, what does General Clauses Act defines? What does General Clauses Act defines? General Clauses Act defines movable property means anything other than immovable property is known as movable property. What the Transfer of Property Act, what the General Clauses Act defined that is, if the property is not movable, that means if the property is immovable, then it is a movable property. Wow, what a definition. But we cannot use that particular definition here. So based on a judicial decision that is given in excise, what happened is, if the item can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition, it is movable. If it requires dismantling and re-erection, it is immovable. If the item can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition, it is movable. If it requires dismantling and re-erection, it is immovable. Say for example, this chair is there. This chair can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. So it is movable. So bench is there. It can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. Is it movable? Yes. That AC is there. It can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. This touch screen is there. It can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. Say this calculator is there. This can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. Say for example, this pen is there. It can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition. Yes. Okay. If the item can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition, if the item can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition, it is movable. Otherwise, if the item required to be dismantled and re-erected at the other place in order to move it from one place to another place, it is called, say lift is there. Lift movable or immovable? Anybody? Movable. Wow. Lift is movable. Okay, can be moved up and down. Na? That's why you are saying that it is movable. Any other answer? Lift is a immovable one. Sir, why lift can be moved from up and down from first floor to third floor, third to fifth, like that? Na? Here, the item that is moving is cabin. Lift means cabin, cables and the mission like wheel will be there at the terrace. So, all these things, if we club them, it is called lift. If the lift is very good, if you want to shift the lift from one building to another building, you have to dismantle it and re-erect it at the other place. That's why lift is immovable. So, goods means every kind of movable property. Okay. And whereas with respect to that, if the item can be shifted from one place to another place, it is movable. If it requires dismantling and re-erection, it is immovable. So this is the word. Okay. And goods includes actionable claim, growing crops, gross and the things attaching to or forming part of the land which can be separated before supply or under a contract of supply is also known as goods. Here the point is, goods means every kind of movable property. I just already cleared the word what is meant by movable property. And goods includes actionable claim. Sir, what is meant by the word actionable claim? Here? Anybody can tell me what is meant by the word actionable claim? Here, the word actionable claim means, what we can say, what the GST Act says is, actionable claim means, actionable claim shall have the same meaning, that is there in Transfer of Property Act. Actionable claim should have the same meaning that is there in Transfer of Property Act. That means whatever the definition that is given in Transfer of Property Act, that will be the definition for actionable claim under GST also. Now the question is here, sir, what is there in Transfer of Property Act? Okay, we will see that. So actionable claim is, the definition that is therein shall have the same meaning, under Transfer of Property Act, shall have the same meaning under the Transfer of Property Act. And whereas with respect to that, sir, what is there in Transfer of Property Act? As per Transfer of Property Act, actionable claim means a claim to a unsecured debt or a claim to the beneficial interest in any movable property that is not in the possession of that person. These two are actionable claims as per Transfer of Property Act. So, as per Transfer of Property Act, actionable claim means, first point, a claim to unsecured debt. Second one, claim to beneficial interest in movable property which is not in his possession. These two are actionable claims as per Transfer of Property Act. The first one is the claim to an unsecured debt is actionable claim. Claim to any beneficial interest in the movable property which is not in his possession is known as actionable claim. So, that means in simple words what we can say is, even though there is no security, still we can go to the court and claim that amount. It is known as technically actionable claim. Even though there is no security, still it is legally enforceable. It is known as actionable claim. Say claim to unsecured debt means a debt must be unsecured one. That means if at all pledge, hypothecation, mortgage is there, then it is not an actionable claim. Understood? In order to treat a claim as an actionable claim, the debt should be an unsecured one. Okay. Example for that is, best example for that, promissory note. Promissory note is the best example for this unsecured debt. Understood? So next point, a claim to the beneficial interest in any movable property which is not in the possession. That means what we can say is agreement to sell. This is a clear case of agreement to sell. Say for example, A enters into agreement with B that he will supply in future some 100 units on say for example, what is the date? November 14th, he actually agrees to supply 100 units to B. So, if at all on this November 14th, if Mr. A fails to supply those 100 units, B is having the legal right to claim either compensation or the goods in the court of law. That's why that one is known as claim to beneficial interest. That is movable property, but which is not in the possession. That means on this day, November 4th, those 100 units is not in the possession. Those units are to be supplied in future. So, if in future, if at all Mr. A fails to supply those goods to Mr. B, definitely what will happen? Definitely, it is a clear case of a beneficial interest in the movable property which is not in the possession of that particular person. It is actionable claim. Even though there is no security, still we can claim it. Understood? This is the point you should remember. And any other examples for actionable claim? Lottery tickets, betting, gambling, all these are actionable claims. And whereas the right to claim the prize money, whereas with respect to lotteries, betting and gambling, the right to claim the prize money is where it is actionable claim. And whereas the second one is insurance policy, whereas the second one is insurance claim is also actionable claim. That means right to receive the insurance amount is actionable claim. And in the same way, claim for arrears of rent is also actionable claim. Claim for, that means right to recovery the rent is also actionable claim. And in the same way, what I told you that promissory note, all these things comes under actionable claims. Okay, all these words comes under actionable claims. Now, as a student, if you are familiar with Sale of Goods Act and all these things, the word actionable claim was excluded from the scope of definition in all those acts. మీరు అబ్జర్వ్ చేస్తే అండర్ సేల్ ఆఫ్ గుడ్స్ యాక్ట్ కానివ్వండి ఆర్ ఎనీ అదర్ యాక్ట్, జనరల్లీ యాక్షనబుల్ క్లైమ్ ఈజ్ ఎక్స్క్లూడెడ్. Actionable claim is excluded. But in GST, actionable claim is included in the definition of goods. Actionable claim is included in the definition of goods. Goods includes actionable claim. Why, sir? What is the reason? Why specifically actionable claim is actually treated as good? Is there any reason for that? Yes, definitely there is a reason. Because what I told you that lotteries, betting, gambling, lotteries, betting, gambling are treated as lotteries, betting, gambling are treated as previously the levy of state government. Now the tax on betting, gambling and lotteries are merged with GST. Previously lotteries, betting, gambling are in state list. But now the tax on betting, gambling, lotteries is merged with GST. So in order to levy the GST on lotteries, betting and gambling, what we have to do? We should treat actionable claim as a good. Otherwise, we cannot levy GST on these lotteries, betting and gambling. So in order to levy GST on the betting, gambling and lotteries, the word actionable claim is included in the definition of goods. Is included in the definition of goods. Understood? So, sir, okay. That means in order to levy GST on betting, gambling and lotteries, okay, the word is included in the definition of GST, that is okay. But whereas other actionable claims like insurance claims, arrears of rent, promissory note, and all these things we are liable to pay GST na sir. అంతే కదా సార్, మీరు చెప్పినట్లుగా GST, in order to levy GST on these betting, gambling and lotteries, the word actionable claim is included in the definition of goods. That is okay. But not only lotteries, betting, gambling, remaining are also treated as goods like arrears of rent, insurance and promissory note. All these things are suffering GST. That's why 7 subsection 2. What 7 subsection 2 deals with? I just previously told you what it deals with. What it deals with? Negative list of GST. So 7 subsection 2 specifies that actionable claims other than betting, gambling and lotteries are not liable to GST. Actionable claims other than betting, gambling and lotteries are not liable to GST. Understood? This is the point you should remember here. Actionable claims other than betting, gambling and lotteries are not liable to GST. This is the point you should remember here. Okay, next point. Growing crops are the grass attaching to or forming part of the land which can be separated before the contract of supply. Say for example, standing timber is there, timber trees. Before supplying those timbers, if we cut the tree, that means it is separated from the land, then it is a good. Then definitely it comes under within the definition of goods. Understood? So, growing crops, gross, and the things attaching to or forming part of the land which can be separated before supply are known as goods. And timber, what we can say, and another example for that, groundnuts. Groundnuts will be under the earth. We pluck them and actually sell them. So, groundnuts, potatoes, onions, any other? Potatoes, onions, carrot, beetroot, everything. So, everything comes under the definition of goods. Now, my doubt is, sir, that means, okay, carrot, beetroot, onion, all these things are goods. Yes, all these things are goods. Sir, are we liable to pay the GST on these items? Are we liable to pay GST on these items? Answer is no. Sir, just now you said that all these are goods. Yes, still I am saying that these are goods. Okay, the logic is here. These items are goods, but GST is not payable because agriculture is exempt from GST. Agriculture is exempt from GST. Therefore, there is no need to pay GST on these items. Understood? So, goods means every kind of movable property. So, movable property means if the item can be shifted from one place to another place in the same condition, it is movable. If it requires dismantling and re-erection, it is immovable, and it includes actionable claim. The claim on which we can take legal action even though there is no security is called actionable claim. But whereas only betting, gambling and lotteries are liable to GST, and growing crops and the things attaching to or forming part of the land, things attaching to or forming part of the land cannot be treated as supply. Cannot be treated as, forming part of the land which can be separated before supply is also goods. So, this is a point you should remember with respect to supply. In supply, the word good. Now, the next point is service. Now, the next point is service. Sir, what do you mean by the word service here? What do you mean by the word service here? Service means anything other than goods is a service. It was drafted, what we can say, so cleverly that anything other than goods is a service. Anything other than goods is a service. Understood? That means, sir, okay, my doubt is building. Building is there. Building is a good. Building is a good. Yes or no? Building is a good? No. Because building is immovable. In order to treat any item as good, it must be movable. Whereas building is immovable. If the building is immovable, then automatically what will happen? If building is immovable, it is not a good. Next question is whether it is a service. Whether it is a service. Yes or no? No? Yes? No? The answer is yes. So, if anything other than goods is a service, the law drafted the word so cleverly that if you go to a person and ask him, hey man, what are you doing? Sir, I am supplying. Okay, what are you supplying? Goods? Yes, pay GST. Okay. Sir, no, these are not goods. Then also pay GST. Sir, these are not goods, sir. Still pay GST. If at all it is not a good, it is a service. That was the definition. So, the law make to count everything within the scope of supply. So, if you go to a person and ask him, what are you supplying? Sir, I am supplying goods, pay GST. No, sir, I am just kidding. I am not supplying any goods. Okay, then also you pay GST. No difference. Why, sir? If at all it is not a good, it is a service. So sale of land, sale of building, everything is covered under the word supply, under the word service. But the real estate sector make a representation to the government that, so in our Telugu language, what we can say, Mahaprabhu, please save me, because I am already paying stamp duty and registration fee and all these things. And sometimes when you just sold, any profit is there, capital gains is also needed to be paid. If at all GST is there, the real estate sector will collapse. Please save us from drowning. They just begged the government. So the government then says, okay, I just granted your wish. Don't worry, my man. I am using my power that is there in 7 subsection 2. Negative list of GST. 7 subsection 2. Negative list of GST. By using that section, I am granting you that sale of land, sale of building are not liable to GST. Go, enjoy. So, now, even though sale of land and sale of building is within the scope of GST, but 7 subsection 2 specifically excluded that those things are out of scope supplying. Therefore, there is no need to pay GST with respect to 7 subsection 2. We should remember that. Understood?